Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Today, we are unpacking something absolutely wild. We're looking at an incredibly provocative text titled The Architect of the Void. And let me tell you, this piece takes literally everything modern society tells us about connection, romance, and community, and just flips it entirely on its head. The author lays out this intense, deeply philosophical argument about the relationship between isolation and true creative power. Now, just to be clear right up front, I'm not here to tell you to abandon your loved ones and go live in a cabin in the woods. But it is my job to help you understand the fascinating mechanics behind this argument. We're going to clinically and objectively dissect this text, piece by piece, to see exactly why it claims that being alone isn't some sort of failure, but rather your ultimate strategic advantage. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at whether solitude is a tragedy or an empire. Then we'll dive into Schopenhauer and the will. After that, we'll explore the literal chemistry of love, the neurological conflict it creates, take a look at some historical architects of the void, and finally wrap up with weaponizing your solitude. All right, Section 1, Solitude, Tragedy or Empire. Let's jump right into the jarring central premise of this text, which fundamentally challenges how we view the whole concept of being alone. The source immediately hits us with this massive paradigm shift. You know how society pushes this romantic mythology of proximity, right? It constantly tells you that if you're alone, you're lonely, that it's a tragedy, a personal failure. But the architect's view, it presents this highly clinical, honestly devastating alternative. It argues that solitude is not a tragedy. Instead, it's a strategic move. It is the absolute source of your empire. It's pitching isolation as a space of immense power, rather than a space of lack. Moving on to Section 2, Schopenhauer and the will. To really grasp why the text thinks we're all constantly being tricked into seeking connection, we've got to look at the underlying philosophy here. So the author draws heavily from the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, specifically his concept of the will. The text defines the will as this massive, blind, unconscious striving that basically underlies all of existence. And here's the kicker, it has exactly one agenda: perpetuating itself. The text actually uses this fantastic metaphor here. It frames humanity as just mere instruments in an orchestra, and we're playing a piece of music that we aren't even meant to hear. So under this framework, that burning drive for connection you feel, it's not actually about your personal happiness. It's literally just this blind, underlying force pushing you to serve its singular agenda of reproduction. Okay, Section 3, the chemistry of love. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because the text takes Schopenhauer's abstract philosophy and applies it directly to human biology. This right here is probably the most explosive quote from the entire source text. The author uses this incredibly charged clinical language, arguing that romantic love is essentially just a tool that nature uses to control you. By calling an intimate relationship a biological narcotic, the author is completely stripping away all the poetry and romance we usually associate with love. The text argues that this narcotic is intentionally designed by the species to shatter your focus. And why? So that you stop building your own legacy and instead enslave your intellect to the will. Basically, nature wants you serving the next generation instead of fulfilling your own potential. When we break down the text's specific neurological claims, we can see exactly how it believes this biological hacking works. The author outlines this potent neurochemical cocktail of dopamine and oxytocin. And get this, according to the source, this cocktail literally mimics the brain patterns of a cocaine addiction. It induces what the text very provocatively labels a temporary state of psychosis. The whole point of this chemical flood is to override your rational mind's resistance. Nature needs you to reproduce, right? So it uses this intensely powerful combination to guarantee you comply, completely bypassing whatever rational goals or intellectual pursuits you had going on. Section 4, the neurological conflict. Let's see how this biological hacking supposedly destroys your ability to do meaningful, original work on a day-to-day basis. 20. That is the magic number here. According to the author, producing genuine creative work requires a deep psychological state called flow, and it demands approximately 20 minutes of absolute uninterrupted concentration just to enter that state. And this perfectly illustrates the core conflict the author is trying to highlight. The text asserts that the background noise of an intimate relationship, and that could mean a partner physically sitting in the room, or even just the mental scripts required for attentive parenting, instantly shatters that 20-minute runway you need. The text makes a really hard-line claim here. At a purely neurological level, the cognitive requirements for original thought and the emotional labor of maintaining proximity to others are mutually exclusive.
You literally cannot be genuinely present for someone else's emotional needs while simultaneously holding a complex original problem in your mind. According to the author, one always cannibalizes the other. Which brings us to Section 5, Architects of the Void. To back up this bold concept, the source points to a few historical figures. Let's look at who the text actually considers the ultimate beneficiaries of this mindset.
The text points to exceptional minds like Isaac Newton and Nikola Tesla to validate its whole thesis. For example, the author claims Newton maintained 0 significant romantic relationships, and that this is exactly what allowed him to preserve his attentional capacity and produce scientific work of just unparalleled depths. Similarly, the text highlights Tesla's commitment to absolute solitude late in his life, and it notes that Tesla didn't view this as some tragic sacrifice. He actually cited it as the exact source of his creative power. So the author is arguing that these figures weren't socially broken in any way. Actually, scratch that. They were intelligent architects. They recognize that sustained interior attention is a finite reservoir, and they simply refuse to drain that reservoir on the will's priorities.
Section 6, Weaponizing Your Solitude. This is the crucial turning point. What exactly happens when the biological illusion finally breaks?
So the source acknowledges that society tells you building a family is the ultimate success. But the text maps out what it calls the architecture of the trap. Step 1, that neurochemical cocktail we talked about creates the initial psychosis. Step 2, the biological narcotic inevitably wears off, which the text claims usually happens after about 18 months to 3 years. And step 3, you are left with a permanent logistical arrangement. This trap requires sustained daily effort to maintain. But guess what? You no longer have the neurochemical fuel that once made it feel effortless. The text argues that truly intelligent people see this life cycle clear as day before they ever sign the social contract.
Instead of being terrified of isolation, the text instructs its readers to, quote, weaponize the void. Just think about that metaphor for a second. Solitude isn't an empty room, it's a furnace. The author argues that this furnace burns away every single distraction and excuse until literally only what is real and effective remains. The ultimate goal, according to the source, is to reach a state where your emotional well-being originates entirely from within. True freedom, they argue, is found when your existence and your mission do not depend on and are not contingent upon the reaction or approval of a partner or a child.
And that brings us to the end of today's explainer. But I want to leave you with the text's incredibly aggressive final ultimatum. The author basically challenges the reader to stop navigating the world blindly and to start seeing the invisible architecture of reality around them. They ask one chilling question: will you build in silence or remain food for the predators? It's such an intense, unapologetic perspective on human connection, focus, and the real price of greatness. Whether you completely agree with this radical philosophy or find it totally alienating, it for sure forces us to think deeply about how we're spending our finite attention. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, Focused Learners. Take some time to really ponder this one, and I'll see you in the next explainer.